Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast. I'm your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist, sociologist, and researcher. Today, hosting Mr. Lacina Koné, Director General and Chief Executive Officer of Smart Africa, and allow me to say this, very notable speaker that we've had at the past e-governance conference 2024. So, Mr. Koné, a very warm welcome to you to the Digital Government Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Mr. Koné oversees the process of defining and advancing Africa's digital agenda. That's what Smart Africa is about. The name says it all already. And has overseen also the development of continental blueprints for Africa on digital identity, a topic that we've heard about, also in connection to places outside of Africa. This is something that I will ask you about. And ICT startups and innovation ecosystems. First of all, let's start exactly from Smart Africa. So, for everybody's benefit, everybody tuning in to the Digital Government Podcast, what is Smart Africa? And also, how many countries and organizations it effectively engages? You've had some recent additions as well, I remember.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful podcast session. Smart Africa, it's a Pan-African organization created 11 years ago with the sole purpose of driving Africa digital agenda, with a vision of transforming Africa into a single digital market by 2030. By saying that, it means it's a very ambitious. Smart Africa is a catalyzer, it's an accelerator for the digital agenda for individual African nations and collectively to form a single digital market on the continent. As of today, we are about 41 countries, composing of about 1.2 billion populations in Africa. 1.4 billion.
A significant percentage.
It's a significant percentage.
A significant percentage. A significant percentage that, obviously, for such a goal, let's say, of, you said 2030, right?
By 2030.
For such a goal, obviously, digital transformation in a large, vast, and I would definitely have to add diverse continent, which is something that maybe sometimes, slips through the cracks when talking about this topic and when having this geographical focus. An endeavor that definitely brings about challenges, but also drivers, like innovation and things that do bring Smart Africa forward in that sense.
Yes.
A question that then I would ask you is, what are, the main digital transformation challenges for governments in Africa at large today? But I would complement this also with drivers of digital transformation, in your opinion, for governments in Africa.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. First of all, you have to know our theme at Smart Africa is connect, innovate, transform, accelerate. You try to move any of these themes before it's actually by order of a priority. Connect, innovate, transform, accelerate.
So the first is connect.
Connectivity. Then it's innovations. Then it's transformations. Then it's acceleration.
Okay. Like a car.
Exactly.
A fast car.
Exactly. So it's actually, it was very uniquely chosen. When you look at the challenges as outlined in our strategic visions 2023, every 3 years we actually build a new a strategic goal. The 2023 to 2025, it focused really mainly on 3-4 things. The number one thing is the infrastructure gap, or if I can say it, a meaningful connectivity challenges. Why I say meaningful connectivity? It's not enough to just have a set of populations in Africa connected. For your information, to set the stage, statistically, on average around the world, is around 64% of the population of the planet is connected.
64% of the global population?
Yes, is connected, and the remainings are not connected. That's on average. The average in Africa is about 46%.
Okay. So lower than the global average.
Absolutely. And why is this? Because it's related to one of the challenges that I said, infrastructure gap, which is Coverage gap, it means area which are not covered, but that's not the most important thing. Usage gap is the most important thing, which is the area are covered with the internet infrastructure, with the connectivity, but people are not using it for four reasons. One, affordability, it's too expensive. Two, smart devices. To be able to go online, you have to have a smart device which can browse an application, smartphones. Three, local content. Give me a reason to use internet, not just the social media.
Of course, yes.
Four, cyber hygiene. How can people trust in technology? So these challenges are the number one, which is the infrastructure gap and meaningful. That's why I say meaningful connectivity, not just connectivity. The connectivity becomes meaningful when it's affordable, when it's accessible. Then it becomes meaningful. Number two is agile regulations, regulation and policy harmonization. Very important. As I said, past days when I was attending the EGA conference, I said a regulation can make or break a nation. That's very important. What makes Estonia Estonia today is because of agile regulation. What makes Singapore Singapore today, agile regulations. So the regulations, and of course, if you want to scale up in terms of economic power, then it becomes now the scale in terms of population. If you look at countries like the United States, 350 million populations, they have the scale. If you look at China, they're 1.5 billion. If you look at India, they're 1.5 or 1.6 billion. It's a scale. So regulation is very important. Regulation should be made to enable innovation.
Mm-hmm.
There should not be any contradiction between regulation and innovations. And the challenges in Africa and our nation, most of the regulation are for regulation, are not for development. So
Okay.
basically, regulation for development. Number three, lack of skills, digital skills, is very important. We have a continent which has 70% of its population less than 30 years old.
Yes.
And there has not been really a real reform in terms of educational system. I'll give you an example. The big tech companies today in the world, unfortunately, do not hire young people based on a bachelor degree or master's degree. They hire them based on skills. What can you show me? Which are basically small certification program. So you can see that there is a mismatch between what is being taught in school, traditional universities, and what's out there. So there's inadequacy. So lack of digital skills is one thing. And the last thing, number four, which is actually very important, there is no digital transformation if there is no digital identification. Because at the end of the day, it all boils down to creating a data economy. How do you create a data economy with a foreign KYC?
With a foreign KYC?
Yes. KYC basically means any private sector in the world, whether it's local or it's international, when you want to access their services, they do a fundamental KYC. It can be a Gmail, it can be a Yahoo, it can be anything. So if the citizens do not have a digital identification to identify them uniquely, because what we're seeing today in terms of a growth in digital economy is just the tip of the iceberg. It's all private to customer. You use a social media app. All the apps you use today, social media, it's a business to customer.
Yes.
But the really chunk of data, the most beneficial part, which can actually help us to thrive in this economy, is the G2C, government to citizen. Because if you put the citizen, if we're going on a citizen-centric social economic development, it means how many applications, how many services government has to render to a citizen. That constitute a data. Then if you aggregate, we are more than 50 countries, 1.4 billion population. Just imagine the amount of data we can be riding on.
Of course.
So these are the four things: infrastructure gap and meaningful connectivity. The second is the regulation and policy harmonization. The third is a lack of skill. The third is a digital identification of our citizens.
I will pick up on a couple of things that you have just mentioned. One, you said that obviously digital skills is also about people understanding and trusting technology. No, I would say that maybe based on the highlight that you just gave on education in doing so, it's also indeed about people trusting themselves in using technology. So like understand, for example, that technology is not a black box. It's not a bunch of risks, let's say. definitely it does carry risks, but if people know them, then they can more effectively reap the benefits, let's say, of using technology in a certain way. The second thing instead I will pick up on is something that I was reflecting on, and that I was reflecting on also when, first of all, like hearing obviously your contributions at the conference. Second, speaking to a friend, Tammy Akabu, who was liaising your delegation at the conference, and who is from Nigeria. And we were exactly wondering about this next aspect that regards more policy harmonization. Smart Africa is an umbrella organization. No? It goes cross borders, beyond borders, above borders, I would say even. So my question on that is often from an outside perspective, so from a perspective of outside of the continent, challenges, opportunities, and digital transformation in the continent are addressed a bit monolithically, like solid as this one big pack box of things. But obviously, while there are at the same time, and there have to be policy harmonization efforts, my question and what we were wondering is, how do you do that and how do you, for example, take this helicopter view a little bit when addressing as well the variety of both opportunities and challenges in digital development throughout such a vast and diverse continent? So, like, Smart Africa has a big effort to go through.
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, you have two set of questions. The first question, which is the trust and the confidence part in the technology.
Yeah.
Today, when you interact with your bank, they always send you OTP.
Yes.
One-time password. When you enter the OTP that you get from your email, you feel confident about the application you're using. It means they cross-check who you are. Then it basically means with identification, while in government service or private sector we are deploying in Africa, we don't basically use the concept of PPPP, public-private people partnership.
Ah, wonderful formula. Yeah.
It basically means privacy by design. And if you do that, every day you do this, you do this easily, you receive OTP from your bank, you want to purchase something, you purchase it. In fact, it's the 4 Ps.
Yeah.
Then you trust. Exactly. That's how we can bring a trust into our users of the smart devices with affordable internet and so on and so forth. Second part. There is helicopter view. When we see policy harmonization on the continent, it means we need to look at over 50 countries, the common denominator between the different laws. If you take telecom law, you take cybersecurity law, you take data protection law, you take digital signature law, and so on and so forth. There should be fundamentally some common denominator. In the back of our head, we do know what sort of policy, what sort of regulation can make a country conducive or attractive to investor. So we need to harmonize that. In a way, we're not looking to international partnership, public-private partnership, to look at Africa just through one country. Kenya, 50 million. Ghana, 30 million. We want the investor to look at Africa as a 1.4 billion, which is a big market. In a way that when investor come into a country, he just goes to one country and move to a second country, the regulation and policy does not change a lot, because one thing the private sector and investor do not like is unpredictability.
Yeah.
So policy harmonization is a necessity. But while we're doing a policy harmonization, we need to be careful. Our closest continent, the closest continent to Africa is Europe.
Yes, of course.
It means that we're not doing a policy harmonization out of the blue. We have to take into account how eventually we can interoperate with our neighbor, which are the international community, Europe, America. For example, the digital ID blueprint that we develop together with the Benin, we are looking how this can be actually compatible with EIDAS, which is the European Standard of Identification.
Yes.
Why not in the future? Why it cannot be compatible with Aadhaar system, which is the Indian system? and so on and so forth. So all of this is taken into account. But guess what? If we're able to harmonize all of these policies at the technology level, make sure it conforms to the international standard, it will be compatible. It basically means when desperate Africans sometimes cross the Mediterranean to Europe, for example, with their fingerprints, you can identify them where they're coming from exactly. That will reduce a lot of damages happening in this world.
I will share a little personal note on this
Yes.
because I am from the south of Puglia, one of the southernmost regions of Italy.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning, actually, one of the very first articles that I wrote in my journalistic career was I'm from a coastal town in the very south of Puglia, the bottom of the heel of the boot, let's say like this.
Yes.
And one of the very first articles that I found myself writing, it was exactly a landing of about, I remember, 130 migrants on the shores of my hometown.
Yeah.
I was just passing it, a beautiful summer night, the moon on the bay. I was just riding on my scooter to go and meet my friends. I was 17, 18 years old. And then I just happened to be the first person who was passing there,
Wow.
seeing this landing. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to stop. I will go join my friends another day or later on, let's say. So this example strikes home, very close to home in this sense.
Absolutely, because we want the African to stay in Africa. But if you want them to stay in Africa, then we need to identify them. And we need to make sure our platform, which identification is also compatible with our neighbors in a way that they know exactly where these people come from. It's very important even for security reasons.
Of course.
Absolutely.
One question that I have about the many P's that we have mentioned is exactly about how do you think that exactly the collaboration between the private sector, because you spoke also about investors, you spoke about private sector, government.
Sure.
One thing that I would like to notice is how it's nice to hear that you said G2C as government to citizen, because I have the feeling that instead sometimes this perspective is framed as government to customer, because, users sometimes are referred to as customers. But that maybe neglects a little bit a number of needs and aspects that are proper of the life of a citizen in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Gabon, I don't know, whichever country we name, and that instead need to be taken into account next to the harmonization effort that happens.
Sure.
So in terms of the private and government sectors and partnerships, and the in general collaboration also with international partners, how do you think that this collaboration, so private and government, but also international partners, how has it helped, or what's its role in advancing towards those goals that you also very fittingly come to revise every 3 years?
Absolutely. This is a very important question. It's basically the public-private partnership at a local level and a public-private partnership at international level. First of all, the partnership is a must. Smart Africa was created because our governments, they realized the government should be creating harmonized policy, conducive environment for business to thrive. The economy, in the traditional economy, is driven by private sector. But who makes the law? The government makes the law.
Yeah.
But traditionally, the private sector, not like Estonia. Estonia is a different case where the government is driving the innovation. Elsewhere, the private sector is driving the innovation, and the government is playing a catch-up. In that sense, the public-private partnership is important in every single aspect of the challenge I mentioned. For example, in infrastructure gap and meaningful connectivity. In the coverage gap, which is area which are not covered, it requires investments. We do have operators, telecom operators on the continent, of course, investing in the coverage gap. But the most important things, where the public-private partnership is important, it is how do we close the usage gap together? People, the telecom investor, they have invested in the area where people are not using it due to the 4 elements I mentioned to you, affordability, smart device, so on and so forth. In order to tackle that, there must be a serious negotiation, serious dialogue between the public and the private in terms of how do we reduce or how do we create incentive for telecom operator for the proliferation of the broadband connectivity on our continent in urban and rural area.
Yes.
That's on a local base. On the international base, it's very important. No one actually can survive alone. We are a player within a global economy.
No country is an island.
Absolutely.
To paraphrase, no man is an island. No?
Absolutely. I think where we can benefit or where the international partnership is very important, if particularly, is the technology transfer. You see, Africa is changing. The narrative about Africa is changing. Africa is not about aid anymore. It's about business and it's about win-win partnership.
Key point.
Key point. So it basically, but we in this ecosystem, in this paradigm, it's like we are on the plane, and the flight plan is changing every time. Take the analogy: you're taking point A to point B, a flight, and before you reach point B, the flight plan is changing maybe every 4-5 hours. 4 or 5 hours analogy to 4 years of term of a president or 5 years of term of the president. So how do we build something on a long-term sustainable within those changes? That's where the international partnership should be focusing more on, instead of, for example, thinking about aid, thinking about subsidies and so on and so forth, building platform which can serve as a pilot, scalable, based on the government service concession to a private sector, to take it and run with it beyond the term of each head of the state.
Of course, yeah.
You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Instead of not coming to Africa, we invest in humanitarian reasons, and we're going to cover the first 2-3 years, the OPEX. Then after 3 years, the government need to create a budget for sustainability of that specific program. But from the get-go, you have to put in your mind, it has to be continued later on by a PPP, public-private partnership, where a private sector can see the bankability of those projects and actually can run with it, because the private sector will survive beyond
the government term.
Exactly.
Yes. So lasting change, literal lasting change.
Exactly.
No? In that sense. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Of course.
That is the tricky part, and that is the biggest challenge. It comes on the not e-government, e-governance side, which is two different. E-government is one thing. The e-government, how do I manage, how do I govern the whole ecosystem, the whole paradigm of digital transformation? Because typically, difficult digital transformation projects, it goes beyond 5, 7, 10 years. So you need to have from the get-go a really, not only a visionary leadership, you need to have an executor leadership, a leadership that can execute.
Mr. Koné, thanks a lot for this. I will close briefly, or better, you will close briefly with one last point that I think builds upon exactly everything that we've been saying so far. So my last question for you is, we've essentially spoken about a sort of like coalition for development, because we mentioned the public sector, but also the public sector, but also the private sector, but also citizens. And we mentioned different levels and plans, a local one and an international one. So regionally, but also globally. My question at this point is, what do you think that decision makers, partners, stakeholders in general, what do you think that they and people in general must get right in order to bring about the effective digital transformation that Smart Africa took on as a mission, essentially, and obviously as a value as well?
Very interesting questions. The digital transformation, first of all, is about transformation of mindset. And in order to be transformed, you have to be informed. Therefore, most of the time, we take it for granted that decision makers, they know. But in reality, practically, they may not know. So there is a lot of advocacy in terms of reskilling, upskilling, even at the decision makers level, so that they take an informed decision. That's what it's lacking. I really think that once someone is someone is well-informed decision maker, they make an informed decision. Sometimes they may be slow in taking decision. Probably they may not know exactly what are the consequences or what are the pros and what are the cons of this particular change. Because you have to put in mind, digital transformation is not about scanning document while keeping the traditional processes in place. It's a new way of doing business, it's a new way of living altogether.
Mr. Koné,
Yes.
Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful chat, and I am sure that everybody in the audience of the Digital Government podcast of yet another episode has enjoyed this very much as well. Thanks a lot also to all of you, indeed, all of you who tuned in to this other episode of the podcast. And that's about it also from your usual host. I just hope, as usual, to see you all again at the next episode, and have a good one.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.